All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today we're tackling the Science of Identity Foundation.
Sif.
Yeah, or some might call it a cult.
Mm.
And to really dig into this, we've got a fascinating story to guide us. Rama Ranson, he's a former member, got excommunicated, actually.
Oh, wow.
And we also have, this is interesting, a Children for Krishna guide. It lays out how Sif approaches raising kids. So
It's like a peek behind the curtain, right? Like how they instill their belief system.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
So we're going to look at Rama's life inside Sif. He grew up completely immersed in it under the teachings of Chris Butler, their leader.
And these teachings, they revolve around what they call the 4 regulative principles, which, shape their whole lives.
And these principles are...
They're pretty strict, like stricter than what you'd find in mainstream Hinduism. They impact everything: diet, interaction with the outside world.
even medical choices, right?
Exactly. And that leads to a really disturbing part of Rama's story. He talks about being denied asthma medication as a child because of the group's distrust of modern medicine.
It's pretty scary to think about a child being denied basic health care.
It really highlights the potential for harm when these doctrines take precedence over well-being.
Absolutely. And it really underscores the control CF had over its members' lives. I mean, the control's even more evident when we learn about Rama's excommunication. He spoke out against the group, and they just completely cut him off, even from his family.
That shunning, it's a classic cult tactic. Silence dissent, maintain power through fear and isolation.
It makes it almost impossible to leave, even if you start having doubts.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the impact on members. But what about the man at the center of it all, Chris Butler?
Yeah, Butler, he's definitely a charismatic figure, but there's a lot of controversy surrounding him. Many people, Rama included, label him as a cult leader.
And looking at his teachings and some of the things he's done, there are definitely aspects that fit that description.
There's even this whole thing about his past. He used to go by Sai, which suggests a very different persona before he became the spiritual leader, adds a layer of mystery,
It does. It makes you question the image he's presenting.
Right, and that kind of carefully crafted image is something you see a lot with cult leaders.
And then there's the fact that Butler lives this lavish lifestyle in Hawaii, all funded by his followers' devotion.
It's a stark contrast, right? The followers live these very strict, austere lives while he enjoys this opulence.
And it's not just that. There are even accusations that he might have profited from illegal activities, specifically a drug trafficking ring run by one of his followers.
Now, those are serious accusations, and whether they're proven or not, they highlight the potential for abuse within these kinds of organizations where the leader's word is law.
And speaking of the leader's word, one of the biggest red flags, according to Rama and others who've left, is Butler's insistence on absolute obedience.
That's a huge warning sign. Genuine spiritual teachers encourage critical thinking, exploration.
But with Butler, questioning his teachings is met with punishment. It breeds blind faith.
Exactly, and that's how they maintain control.
So we've got this leader, this structure, but how does Sif itself actually operate? It's got this very rigid hierarchy with Butler at the top.
That hierarchy, it's crucial for control. It reinforces his authority, makes it almost impossible to challenge him without challenging the whole system.
And to further isolate members, Sif actively discourages them from interacting with other Krishna devotees, or even the outside world.
Isolation, it's a classic cult tactic, right? Limit outside influences, control the narrative, create this us versus them mentality.
And this isolation plays right into how they raise children, which brings us to that Children for Krishna guide.
This document, it's essentially their blueprint for raising kids, very specific guidelines on everything, their education, their diet, even how they dress.
Sounds like they try to instill those beliefs from a very young age.
Oh, absolutely. It's early indoctrination, shapes their worldview before they can even question it.
It's interesting, Rama actually observed this difference between women who stayed in Sef and those who left, like in the way they dressed and behaved.
That's telling, right? It speaks to the social pressure to conform, even in something like clothing.
So it seems like control is a key aspect here, but how do they maintain this influence over their members? What are the mechanisms at play?
Well, I think it's important to remember that people don't join groups like Seth because they're, gullible. They're often seeking something, meaning purpose, a sense of belonging.
So Sif is giving them what they're looking for.
Exactly. They provide that community, a clear set of beliefs, a charismatic leader who promises guidance. And for someone feeling lost, that can be very appealing.
Right, it fulfills a need.
And once they're in, it's constant reinforcement, isolation from outside perspectives, social pressure to conform.
Makes it hard to break free.
And that's where those manipulation tactics come in. Fear, guilt, the threat of losing your whole support system.
And Rama's story shows just how high the cost of speaking out can be. He lost everything.
It's a heartbreaking reminder of how powerful these beliefs can become, how hard it is to escape that control.
Leaving SIF, it's not just changing your mind, it's reconstructing your whole reality.
You have to question everything you've ever known, potentially face rejection from your loved ones, start over completely.
The psychological toll must be immense. The trauma, the guilt.
It's a complex situation, and while we focused on the negatives, it's important to understand what draws someone to SIF in the first place.
You're right, there's always another side of the story, but we've got to unpack that a bit later.
We do. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the negatives, especially with all these accusations of manipulation and control. But, as we were just saying, it's important to try and see the other side too. What would draw someone to SIF in the first place?
Yeah, there's got to be more to it than just fear and blind obedience, right?
Mhm.
People don't just join these groups for no reason.
Exactly. Think about it. SIF offers this really tight-knit community, a very clear set of beliefs. It gives people a sense of order, of purpose. And then you have this charismatic leader promising spiritual guidance. For someone who's struggling with, life's big questions or just feeling lost, it can be very appealing.
It's like a ready-made answer to that search for meaning and belonging.
Exactly. And once you're in that environment, it's constant reinforcement of the ideology. You're isolated from any outside perspectives. There's social pressure to conform. It all just solidifies their beliefs. It becomes their reality.
It's almost like they're living in an echo chamber. No room for dissenting voices.
And that brings us back to those manipulation tactics we talked about. Fear, guilt, the threat of losing your entire support system. That's powerful stuff.
And Rama's story really drives that point home. The personal cost of speaking out. He lost his family, his community, everything.
It's a tragic consequence, and it just shows how deeply ingrained those beliefs become, how incredibly hard it is to break free from that control.
It's clear that leaving a group like SIF is no easy feat. It's not just about changing your mind. It's like rebuilding your whole world.
Imagine having to question everything you've ever known, everyone you've loved, facing that rejection, starting from scratch. It's daunting.
And the psychological impact, the trauma, the guilt, the sense of betrayal, that's a lot to carry.
It really is, and that's why it's so important to approach this topic with nuance, with empathy. We can't just label everyone involved as a victim or a perpetrator. It's much more complex than that.
There's a human story at the heart of it all.
Absolutely. And speaking of complex, let's circle back to that Children for Krishna guide for a moment. It really gives us this unique look into how SIF shapes the minds of their youngest members.
It's like a parenting manual, laying out these very specific ways to raise children according to the SIF framework, like molding them into the perfect SIF members from the very beginning.
The level of detail in that guide is remarkable. It covers everything: diet, dress code, education, social interactions, all designed to instill those values, those beliefs from a very early age.
It's a form of indoctrination, wouldn't you say?
Well, it definitely raises concerns about that, because when children are raised in such a controlled environment, so isolated from outside influences, it's hard for them to develop their own critical thinking skills, to make informed choices about what they believe, about how they want to live their lives.
So they're essentially taught to accept Butler's teachings as the absolute truth, no questions asked.
And that lack of questioning, that's crucial for maintaining their power structure. It's much harder to control people who are encouraged to think for themselves, to challenge authority.
And it's fascinating that Rama pointed out that difference between the women who stayed in SIF and those who left, even in the way they dressed. It suggests that something as simple as clothing can be a tool for control, for conformity.
That's a great point. It really speaks to these subtle ways that groups like SIF exert their influence. It's not just about beliefs. It's about outward appearance, behavior. There's this right way to be within the group. Anything else is frowned upon.
It's like they're creating a uniform, literally and figuratively.
Exactly. That uniformity, it strengthens their group identity. It creates that separation from the outside world, a visual reminder of where you belong, of how you're different.
It all circles back to control, but we can't just ignore those accusations of criminal activity either. The alleged drug trafficking ring. If those allegations are true, That adds a whole new layer of concern here.
It definitely does, and while it's important to remember that those are allegations, not proven facts,
Mm.
the possibility that Sif was involved in something like that raises some serious questions, ethical and legal. It suggests a willingness to operate outside the law, to potentially exploit followers for their own gain.
It's a disturbing thought. Makes you wonder what else might be going on behind the scenes.
It reminds us that groups like Sif thrive on secrecy, making it incredibly hard to separate truth from fiction. And that's exactly why stories like Rama's are so crucial. They give us a glimpse behind that curtain, encourage us to think critically about belief and authority.
Yeah, his experience, combined with that Children for Krishna guide, it really paints a picture of what life inside SIF might be like. It's a valuable lesson in the importance of questioning, of thinking for yourself, of making your own informed choices.
And that, I think, is at the heart of this deep dive. It's not about judging individuals. It's about understanding these dynamics of power, of belief, of control, and giving ourselves the tools to navigate the complex world of spiritual seeking.
It's been fascinating and at times unsettling to explore the world of SIF, but the conversation doesn't stop here.
No, it doesn't. We still have a lot to unpack and consider.
Well, we've really gone deep on SIF, haven't we? From Rama's personal story to that Children for Krishna guide, it's given us, I think, a pretty good look inside their world.
Yeah, it's been a journey for sure. And while we've focused on cis specifically, a lot of what we've talked about, the power dynamics, the belief systems, those control tactics, that's stuff that goes way beyond just one group.
Right, it's like those themes, they're almost universal. They speak to something about being human, that need for meaning, wanting to belong, how easily we can be manipulated, especially when we're feeling vulnerable.
It really underscores how important critical thinking is, and not just in, an academic sense, but as a life skill. Being able to question the information you come across, evaluate different viewpoints, and then make your own informed choices about what you believe, who you trust.
It's about owning your own narrative, not just accepting whatever you're told, especially when it comes to, faith, spirituality, things like that.
And that's tough. It really is, especially when you've got these charismatic leaders, groups that offer these easy answers, that promise of community. It's easy to get swept up in that desire for belonging, for certainty.
So what can we do? How do we protect ourselves and others from falling into those traps?
I think awareness is a big part of it. The more we understand about how these groups operate, the tactics they use, the better we are at recognizing the warning signs, making those informed choices.
And it's about fostering that open dialogue, encouraging critical thinking in our own communities, creating spaces where people feel safe to express doubts, ask questions, seek help if they need it, without being judged.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating that healthy skepticism, encouraging people to think for themselves, not just blindly follow someone else's lead.
And if you know someone who might be involved in a group that's raising some red flags, approach them with compassion. Don't try to force them out. That can often backfire.
Focus on maintaining that relationship, express your concerns gently, offer resources if they're open to it. But remember, it's their journey ultimately. They have to find their own way out.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into SIF, I think the key takeaway here is that critical thinking, open dialogue, compassionate support, those are our best defenses against manipulation, against undue influence.
And we can't forget personal resilience, the courage to question, the strength to walk away from harmful situations.
Rama's story is a powerful example of that resilience, and his experience, even though it was painful, it's a lesson for all of us.
We hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about, encouraged you to be a bit more discerning in the world around you.
Remember, knowledge is power, and being able to think for yourself, that's true freedom.
Until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and never stop diving deep.